Hi, welcome to the Optimum Tide. I'm Anastasia Jaegerman. Today, we're starting a series called The Women Warrior. It's a two-part series, and I'm proud to have Erin McClintock with us today as our guest. So I'd like to introduce you to Erin McClintock from Nationwide. Hi, Erin. How are you today?
Hi, Anastasia. I'm doing very well. And I just want to say thank you to not only you personally, but thank you to Optimum Marie for asking me to be part of this amazing podcast. I'm very excited and very passionate, obviously, a little bit about Women Warrior and like how we're looking at them in an underserved market play. But before we dive into the content of the podcast, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Erin McClintock of Nationwide Financial. I'm the Director of Underwriting Innovation. I am responsible for automation acceleration for both our life with long-term care writer and our hybrid long-term care and life product, our Care Matters product suite. And I have vast years of experience in the industry, both on the carrier side and in the reinsurance side. So I always love when I get to have fun talks with the reinsurers because I get to play both sides of the fence and understand the realm of what the challenges are we're seeing, especially when it comes into the underserved market, which so many of us from a carrier perspective and reinsurers are really, really wanting to hit because, you know, we're trying to close that protection gap. But I do also have to say I love that we're getting away from that phrase and using underserved market. So.
Good. I'm pleased to hear that. But I mean, we've been hearing that in every industry meeting we attend. And you recently also spoke in New York about the underserved market. But like you said, let's shift gears and let's talk about women in our industry, the insurance industry. Like, we'll do a little bit of a history just on the top of my head, and I'm just winging this as usual. So women in the life insurance industry. I remember when I started, we won't go too far because that's eons ago, back in the late 80s, mostly surrounded by men. And in that the workforce at that time was predominantly ruled by men, let's just say, and that women were either trained as administrative assistants. And I was fortunate enough at that time, and you could see that when underwriters are retiring, the vast group are largely elderly men. And now more and more women are taking more and more space in the life insurance space, but not only as jobs, but also as consumers. But tell me about a little bit more about the history, how you see it from your point, because we're from different generations. So you've lived different experience than I have in our industry. So please share.
What gave away the different generations?
Yeah.
Is it the hair?
I had hairier color.
I'd love to see these photos. I'm going to need some photographic evidence.
I will, definitely.
But no, that's a great question because, you know, I started my career I started in the first recession, right? So I started off as a case manager and then was a homegrown underwriter to Nationwide. I left on my second tour of Nationwide, just for the awareness out there. But there were starting to come a lot more women in the underwriting space, but not so much in leadership. Yeah. And so you start to see that transition of a lot more women coming in. As you already talked about how men were retiring, so you're seeing a lot more women coming into that role. And I think really out of that, and I'm going to speak very specifically at the culture of Nationwide, was we start to see a much larger push and a much more stronger strategy towards serving talking to women and getting more women to be protected equally as men, because the honest truth is a lot more women are going to college than men, and they're graduating and they're starting their careers and they're being very, very successful. And you're starting to see that, you know, and when we get into part 2 of the series, that's more of the medical that we're going to be seeing out of the underwriting. Yes. And this right here is more of like, where's the financial aspect that women need to be more insured? Because when you start taking a step back, and you look at a very traditional realm where it's like, you know, people are getting married, they're having their homes. Women generally always did take care of the financials of the house, right? They knew when the bills needed to be paid, how much the gas was, the electricity, but the men were the most insured. A lot of women are, you know, homemakers, like my mother included as a homemaker. She is not valued as much. But let's be honest, she raised 4 kids. If something were to happen to her, my poor dad would not know what to have done.
No.
The poor man didn't even I can tell you a crazy story where he called me at 3:00 in the morning because a dog threw up on the comforter and he didn't even know what to do. And so he's like, just put the comforter.
Didn't even know how to start the dishwasher.
The washer. He didn't even know how to do it. I was like, just put it over there and I'll come over and take care of it later today because you called me at 3:00 in the morning. But, you know, there's some domestic things in there that you're starting to see see this larger shift from a cultural standpoint that is driving a lot of women buying life insurance and needing to go more into that financial space for protection and just having that comfort of knowing that their assets are going to be taken care of as well.
You and I talked before we started the podcast. You had an interesting statistic about single females owning their own homes. So compared to married couples, and we're talking about females between the age of 30 and 40. So share that number with me, because I was like fascinated by knowing that, because I owned also my own home, but at that time I was married, and at that time also he was the majority breadwinner.
Yeah.
But now single females are owning their own home without having a partner, and whether they're single ladies with cats or dogs or childless, dare I say, I'm sure that the insurance need is obviously there. I mean, but tell me about the statistic, because I was fascinated by that.
It's so this came from a stat done by the National Association of Realtors in 2023 that said 20.3 million women or homeowners is actually single women, and that is more than single men who own their homes. And in that same year, married couples was 49.8%. So if you really think of it, it's quite a vast number of women who are just becoming financially independent. But what comes with financial independence? A little bit of stress, right? We all can speak here in 2024 and talk about the inflation, the economy, where things are going. Our salary demands keeping up with inflation. You can talk about it, and everybody from every single walk of life that I know, everybody is stressed something. There's financial stress that is there. So when you're really speaking to a group that generally most financial professionals don't know how to seek and go after, it's how do we connect more in a maybe a little bit more digital way, where it's like social media, right? So you can start having these financial influencers are speaking to women. I will tell everybody I scroll through TikTok a lot, probably too much, to the point where I probably do need a Netflix intervention. It's like, you done? But there's a lot of things in there that these, financial influencers are hitting these markets. Like they're talking about getting index UL life products to help hide assets, for assets and things like that. Most of us in the industry know kind of why you get an index UL, but for most people, they don't. So I don't know. I have a question for you. When you're out in public and you mentioned you're in the life insurance space, does anyone talk to you about IUL products?
None. No one.
I feel like I cannot tell you the number of Ubers and Lyfts I've jumped into.
Really?
And people are like, hey, you're in the life insurance space. Talk to me more about an index UL. I happen to know I don't have to pay taxes if I have an index UL product. And I'm like, it's not really how that works, but it is and isn't, depends. But getting a little off topic here.
But this is interesting to me, because the first thing people ask me first and foremost when I say I'm in the insurance industry is they not dread it, but they're almost like, oh, you're not going to sell me an insurance policy, are you? And I'm like, no, I'm on the underwriting side. And then they usually don't know what that means. And I'm like, I'm in business development. Let's just... And then it stops there. But that's interesting that folks know a lot about index UL.
And a lot of it is from the social media space that's coming in, and you're having these influencers that are talking about the need for life insurance. So it's a way to hit. And I think it's actually a positive aspect to get more people to talk about insurance. But if you really look at some underlying numbers, like I'm going to give a little bit of a quote from a LIMRA study that talks about women who really are underserved by anywhere. The studies vary. It's either 6% to a 9% gap difference between men and women who are insured. Same age groups, everything, 6 to 9%. And of the women that they've interviewed, they kind of ask, like, do you want life insurance? Like, why do you want to have it? Of course, we all know the perceived answer from any insurance buying populations, it's too expensive, right? That's the first answer. We all kind of know that one. Yeah. But some of it just kind of lies into they don't know, when it comes to speaking to financial advisors, there's some intimidation factor. And if we think really about how women are brought up, how they're raised, and not only in the U.S. society, but across the globe, is we take a little bit more of a domestic role, right? So, we're spitballing back and forth between this podcast. I was talking about even when I was in high school, and again, we've already kind of addressed that I'm a millennial. And
that's okay. You're safe here. You're in a safe space.
Yeah, it is. There wasn't a financial class for us. Oh. There wasn't, and I went to a suburban school of Columbus, Ohio. There was not a financial course, but there was a home economics course, right?
See,
so it's like
I didn't have one of those.
I mean, I got to learn how to sew. Do I remember? No, I pay somebody to do that because I don't know how to do it. But one of the things was, we had a couple exercises that you had to raise an egg and make sure you didn't break the egg as your child, or you had a sack of flour that, like, as long as you didn't punch the flour in the sack, or you didn't leave it at home, like some people, parent. Some people did. Like, that was your parenting skills. Like, we've talked about how those, eggs and the flour sacks have evolved to being like,
real life looking babies.
Also slightly creepy.
Yes,
but
I agree.
There's some things there that it's like, there is that intimidation factor when it comes in speaking to sales, because there is not a financial education, which is really, it's something that everybody needs in the world, right? You need to know what life insurance or, products are out there, from a retirement to even checking and savings, even like basic foundational things like people should know. But when you're speaking to sometimes men who predominantly are the vast majority of sales folks, sometimes men may unknowingly speak to women in a way that's a little bit derogatory or condescending, which is very off-putting. And we kind of see that a lot when you talk to women about just taking your car in for mechanical maintenance.
Well, you see that often, yes. Especially, that's a cliche, but it's a true cliche. That's why it's called a cliche, because it happens. It's a real fact.
Yeah, exactly. So you have some women who are a little bit intimidated. They don't really have that, but they know that there's stress of financial needs, right? They need to be protected. They need to have like traditional asset, like to cover their home, to cover loved ones that may not be traditional style loved ones, right? It may not be a partner or a spouse. It could be a niece and nephew that they also help raise. And those are things that, like, the nuclear family that we see in the past has been changing over the past couple generations, right?
And that will be interesting when you mention that, because the beneficiary assignment of that. So that will be a new way for us to think about it in underwriting, because we've been conditional. I know I have been, because I'm from an older generation than yours. And for us, it was very, traditional, the insurable interest. It must be your spouse, or it must be, there must be an insurable interest and prove a loss. And now that you have such a dynamic with different changes in families, and we won't go to the gender assignment, and that's another topic. We could talk about that for another podcast. But how will we adjust to that? But so are we saying that also females are more susceptible for online sales, or are you finding that? Is that a
some are. I mean,
point?
Like, from that same LIMRA study, they say 3 out of 10 women prefer online sales because there's there's a comfortability. Like, I will be honest, I am that person. I unfortunately live in the state of New York, fortunately and unfortunately simultaneously. We all know the regs, but it's really hard to buy like a direct-to-consumer platform, like direct-to-consumer of these products. But it's a great introduction, because generally your direct-to-consumers are your terms that are simpler. I know they're expanding more into that index UL space that's coming out there, but simple terms, and you can buy them and it gives you the coverage that you need, right? So you're not overinsured, but it's enough for you to have. And I will say, I also was homegrown into that space of, it was your spouse or your partner, or like, even then it was like, if it was an ex-spouse, they were like, "Ooh, why?" And I'm like, well, that's a divorce decree. Right. And, some things that are there, and we're starting to see a little bit more of that shift. That's, if you own your own policy, you can list whomever you want. Because the honest truth is, if you issue that policy today and you question that beneficiary, they can just change it tomorrow. Right.
We all know that.
No one's coming and asking that question.
Right.
But there is that comfortability of being in your own home, and with the direct-to-consumer sales. And I know what everyone's going to say with direct-to-consumers. It is an investment. We all know that. But there are markets that are there. It's needed for. And, anytime you have an introduction to our industry, it can just continue to grow, because just because you started off as direct to consumer does not mean you're going to, the marketing stops there, right? You're going to have marketing flyers coming around. You're going to have, obviously, again, going back to social media and TikTok and things like that are speaking to you. There's just a lot that people are going to start seeing more from an advertisement that's going to be a little bit more in your face than versus a traditional scrolling through the TV, right?
Right.
To get you to get a little bit more into those investment products, especially as you're growing in your career, you're making more money, and you can have those conversations with financial advisors. And, the one thing, I had a conversation with my boss, and we were talking about women and how do you make women comfortable in sales, right? And it's the sales advisors really just have to find a way to be very, very relaxing and very trustworthy. And that's the number one thing that women look for, is somebody who's incredibly trustworthy. Again, going back to that cliche of the mechanic, we have these experiences where we want somebody that we can trust, because we live longer than men. And
we're better financial planners. I'm sorry out there. I'm sorry, guys, but it's a known fact. So I'm just stating facts. So I don't know why women have been kind of left to the side, but we're moving from more paternalistic style of dealing in our industry to more on the female side. Maternalistic? Is that how you say it? Maternalistic? Sorry about my stumble. But I'm excited to see that, because, having grown up with the more paternalistic way of doing things, I will tell you that at one point, females had a lower salary for their same income as their male counterpart. And that's like total inequality, totally unacceptable. And that's changed. So we're making progress. And I think in insurance, we'll talk about the medical part in our second part. We'll talk more about the medical aspect and how females have been looked at and issues that are not addressed with males, obviously. But I think if you had anything else to add on this segment, I think we might wrap it up here.
I think, the one thing that we could easily just say if we wanted to look at how do you speak to women more, is like the easiest answer could just be hire more female financial professionals. But we all know that's easier said than done. But I do think that, as an industry, we do need to help educate and get the word out about our products, make it a comfortable, easy buying experience, and then make sure that everybody feels comfortable. And because remember, women, as you said, Anastasia, like women are the financial planners, single, married, whatever. Women live longer than men. And we're the ones that need to have that comfortable level and with a relationship with the financial advisor, because when that claim comes of somebody for a loved one, because we do assist with other loved ones, right?
Yes.
We need to feel comfortable, because those are very vulnerable moments. And that's the reason why trustworthiness is the number one thing that when women look at for sales, like for financial professionals. So I think that's my biggest takeaway, is continue to market towards women. Make sure that women are fully educated on financials, and completely make sure our staffing is there for the comfort level.
Yeah, well said. I have nothing else to add. Thank you for joining me today.
Yes, thank you for having me.